Thank you, Nadav. And now we're honored to have Patrick Heim as our first keynote speaker today. Patrick is the head of trust and security at Dropbox, and with 500 million users and growing, Patrick will share with us how Dropbox cuts through the mass to create a balance between the cutting edge and traditional. Please welcome Patrick to the stage. This is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I've got a bit of a mysterious title here, A Tale of Two Cities Cyber Edition. Why A Tale of Two Cities? If you haven't read the book yet, it starts with a quote. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And honestly, that's kind of what we have right now with regards to innovation. And Nadav mentioned it, we're overwhelmed as CISOs about the options that are out there. So it's amazing that we have these options, but there are almost too many for us to be able to absorb them. This is a very interesting eye chart. This is from Eric McAlpine, Momentum Partners, luckily right across the street from Dropbox, who maintains kind of the cybersecurity landscape. There are 1,600 companies in the cybersecurity space right now, plus or minus 100, so that's his margin of error. $3.9 billion have been invested in startup companies in the space last year alone, and we already thought that was a bubble, but guess what? It's going to $5 billion, so this complexity is going to continue to increase. Wow, okay. If you're a CISO on the buying side, how do I handle this? So this is where I want to share with you today a little bit of the prioritization framework. How are ways you can think about approaching the marketplace? We're heavily dependent on cybersecurity vendors. None of us can build our way out of it ourselves. So we have to figure out how to reduce this complexity into something that's manageable for us. So the first thing I like to say is I think it's the role of the CISO to continue to stay curious. There's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if you've heard about that or not, but in the which is basically a study that indicated that the more confident you are that you have all the right answers, the less competent you actually are. And especially in the realm of cyber, this is evolving so rapidly that the role of a CISO has to be, stay curious, meet with as many startup companies as you can, but target who you meet with. Because if you try to do all 1,500 or so, you're probably going to be not doing your day job anymore. Figure out what the themes are that are interesting. What are the innovations from a category perspective? Like deception technologies, for example, are super interesting and other ones. Invest your time strategically, but stay curious, stay humble throughout this process, because these companies are coming up with amazing innovation, and you have a lot to learn from them. Even if you don't buy their product, it's going to help figure out, it's going to complete your mental model in terms of how to think about cyber. Second thing I would say is, and I've noticed this over the last several years, is that good technology doesn't always win. When I used to evaluate companies and ask my team to look at it, it was maybe 70–80% focused on the quality of the technology and the innovation, and then like 20–30% on the business team. But what's happening is that with this 1,600 companies out there, unfortunately, most of those aren't going to survive. So I have to put myself in a position where I evaluate the technology not only from a capabilities perspective, but I actually have to spend much more time evaluating the strength of the business team behind it. What's my gut feeling after I meet with the CEO and the CTO and the rest of the team that they're going to be around in a year or 2 or 3 years? Do I think they actually have the backing to be able to pull off growth that they require to stay afloat? So it's kind of unfortunate, but I have seen this phenomenon now where more and more of these companies, some of them have great technology, but they're just not going to cut it from a business growth perspective. There's too much money out there that's chasing these innovators and the entrepreneurs, and unfortunately, that's just the nature of any kind of bubble, that you have a larger failure rate that's out there. So I would challenge you to think about technology innovation, not just from a security capabilities perspective, but is this a team that's going to be able to win and sustain in the long term? Buy versus build. This is another thing. I've been in a number of different companies, and they range from I have very little in-house technical talent to I have amazing world-class developers, innovators, and researchers that can build things themselves. So the takeaway here is be very aware of what should you be building and bringing in-house versus what should you be going to the marketplace. And it is very much of a function of what's your core business and what skills do you have to execute. And in the Dropbox example, if I look at scaling to 500 million users, one of the things we look at very actively is fraud and abuse. There are a lot of people who try to hack into our platform or who try to abuse it in ways to spread bad things like malware. And when I think about operating at that scale and how customized we are, there aren't any solutions in the marketplace that are scaled to operate for an internet scale company with 500 million users on custom systems that we build. We have no alternative but to build those type of capabilities ourselves. Conversely, if you look at something like you're operating in healthcare and you may not have access to those quality of engineers, and it's more of a generic problem you're trying to solve, go out and buy that stuff. But make it a very conscious decision. Another thing I've noticed is that with 1,600 companies out there, there is a lot of what I call risk noise. And I'm going to start with the mobile phone on the right-hand side. I'm going to ask you a question, which is, of all the major incidents that you've seen out there and big breaches, how many of those actually go back to like a mobile phone vulnerability? And the answer is almost like none of them that I know of. Yet there is a lot of attention put on like mobile security. And clearly outside the United States, it's a completely different environment, much more aggressive. But if I just look at the facts around what causes loss, does mobile cause loss? No. Conversely, when I look at that little device on the left-hand side, that's actually a YubiKey, a Yubico token right here. Focus on strong authentication. When we, again, look at it from the context of what causes losses, passwords cause losses. Almost inevitably, when you look at the chain of attack around major breaches, you had a password problem right there. So that's a real risk area to focus on. Focus on it in terms of your company, focus on it in terms of scaling to consumers that are out there, but maintain that balance, because with those 1,600 companies, there are a lot of companies that are maybe investing in things that are theoretically kind of cool, they're intellectually very cool, but they may not be very practical. So prioritize on what is actually causing the real risk. Now, the other dynamic I've seen with all of these companies innovating out there is that some of them are developing products, but a lot of the innovation that's happening is incremental. And what's actually happening is these companies are delivering awesome features to the marketplace. The question you have to ask yourself is, how much do I want to be forward-leaning in terms of adopting the latest features, which come with complexity, because how many additional agents do you want to install in your endpoints, okay, to do something that's very specific? So it's really a function of timing the marketplace. Eventually, if it's a great idea, they'll get acquired, they'll get absorbed, it'll be in a product suite. So ask yourself, how much do I need this specific feature right now? Versus, could I wait for an acquisition cycle, a consolidation cycle into what I already pay for that's already in my technology stack? And from an investor perspective, this is also really interesting, because what can happen is consolidation of these companies. And we're seeing this more and more. Eric McAlpine called it a chain of pearls, where companies with very specific features are coming together, offering broader product suites. And the last one here is really plan for innovation. And when I first came to Dropbox, I get all excited, and I talk to my engineers, introduce them to companies. They pull me aside, and they said, stop it, okay? You know, it was like, we have to prioritize. We have our sprint cycles. Love this innovation stuff, but it's a focus on prioritization. Don't randomize your most valuable engineers. So carve out the time, carve out a team, carve out the resources, and bound it for going and evaluating these companies, for testing them, piloting them. In other words, plan for the innovation and be very cautious and conscious that you don't disrupt your engineers, because the one resource you're not going to be able to scale inside your company are your most talented security engineers.